Beneath the grey stone walls of the Tower of London lies a place where silence once broke under the echo of final footsteps. A space that would become one of England's most infamous execution grounds. But how did this royal fortress transform into a stage of death? Originally constructed by William the Conqueror in the 11th century, the tower was known as a symbol of power and intimidation. It served as a royal palace, treasury, armory, and prison. Yet by the late medieval period, it had become something darker. Political prisoners, often nobles or those tied to royal blood, were brought here not just to be held, but to be destroyed in full view of the crown's wrath. Executions within the tower were rare, reserved for those of high status whose deaths were considered too dangerous or too symbolic to occur among the common crowds of Tower Hill. These inner executions took place most often on Tower Green, a private space where the monarchy could control both the blade and the message it sent. Women, in particular, faced a unique terror within these walls. Highborn ladies accused of treason, adultery, or heresy were often executed in silence, without the roar of a watching crowd, yet never without fear. What awaited them was not just death, but a judgment designed to erase their name from power, history, or faith itself. Lady Jane Grey, the teenage queen's tragic end. She was known as the 9 Days Queen, yet Lady Jane Grey never desired the crown that ultimately condemned her. At just 16 years old, Jane became a pawn in a dangerous game of political ambition and religious upheaval, one that would end with her young life taken within the walls of the Tower of London. In July 1553, following the death of King Edward VI, son of Henry VIII, Protestant nobles sought to prevent the Catholic Mary Tudor from ascending to the throne. With Edward's backing, they named Lady Jane Grey, his Protestant cousin, as successor. Jane was intelligent, devout, and educated in the Protestant tradition, but she was also deeply reluctant. As contemporary accounts suggest, she accepted the crown weeping, coerced by her parents and powerful figures like John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Her reign lasted only 9 days. Mary Tudor, backed by popular support, claimed the throne with swift resolve. Jane was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London, initially spared execution. But her fate turned once Thomas Wyatt led a rebellion in early 1554 to restore Jane to the throne. Though Jane played no role in the plot, her existence now posed a threat to Mary's rule. On February 12, 1554, Jane was led to Tower Green. She wore a black gown and carried a prayer book. Historian Raphael Holinshed, writing later in the 16th century, recorded that she spoke calmly before her death, declaring, "I am come hither to die, and by a law I am condemned to the same." The fact, indeed, against the Queen's Highness was unlawful. Blindfolded and trembling, Jane struggled to find the execution block. In a moment, both harrowing and haunting, she cried out, "What shall I do? Where is it?" before being guided by an onlooker. Moments later, the axe fell, and England's youngest queen was gone. Lady Jane Grey died not for crimes she committed, but for the ambitions of men and the collision of dynasties. Her death marked more than the fall of a girl queen. It revealed how quickly innocence could be consumed by the Tower's ruthless justice. Margaret Pole's cursed end, the Countess's forgotten death. She was born into royalty, lived through dynasties, and outlasted kings. But in the end, Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, met one of the most disturbing deaths ever recorded within the Tower of London. Margaret was the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, brother to King Edward IV, placing her among the last surviving members of the Plantagenet line, a family that once ruled England. Though she survived the bloody Wars of the Roses and became a loyal subject to the Tudor dynasty, her royal bloodline made her a threat in the eyes of Henry VIII. Initially favored under Henry's reign, Margaret was appointed governess to Princess Mary and granted lands and titles. But the tide turned in the 1530s as Henry broke with the Catholic Church and began targeting anyone who resisted his new authority. Margaret's son, Reginald Pole, a cardinal in Rome, openly criticized the king's actions, calling him a tyrant and questioning his legitimacy. Though Margaret had no direct role in her son's words, Henry's paranoia could not ignore her connection. In 1538, she was arrested without trial and held in the Tower. After 2 years of imprisonment, on May 27, 1541, Margaret, then in her late 60s, was led to Tower Green. Unlike most executions of high-born women, Margaret's death was chaotic and brutal. No formal charges were ever proven, and no proper trial held. Chroniclers state that she refused to lay her head on the block, protesting her innocence to the end. According to the 16th century writer Edward Hall, the inexperienced executioner missed his mark repeatedly. It took multiple strikes to end her life, leaving a gruesome scene that shocked even her enemies. Her final words were not recorded. Her grave in the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula remains unmarked by grandeur, her memory nearly erased by time. Margaret Pole's execution wasn't justice. It was a calculated warning. Anne Askew's dark ordeal, the tortured heretic burned alive. She was a gentlewoman by birth, a scholar by nature, and a martyr by the crown's hand. Anne Askew's execution was unlike any other at the Tower of London. Not for treason, not for royal rivalry, but for her faith. In a realm torn between old religion and reform, Anne's unshakable Protestant beliefs would seal her fate in fire. Born in 1521 to a prominent Lincolnshire family, Anne was well educated and deeply committed to reading and interpreting the Bible, something the Church had long denied to women. She embraced Protestant teachings at a time when England's religious identity was in violent flux. Although married against her will to a Catholic, she refused to conform, eventually leaving her husband and traveling to London to preach her views. This defiance, particularly by a noblewoman, did not go unnoticed. In 1545, she was arrested for distributing banned Protestant texts. Though questioned, she was released, but the reprieve was brief. By 1546, Anne was again in custody, this time under the scrutiny of Thomas Wriothesley, Lord Chancellor, and Sir Richard Rich, both agents of Henry VIII's conservative court faction. Desperate to extract names of other reformers, they took Anne to the Tower of London. There, she endured what no other woman of her rank had before: torture on the rack. Despite her noble birth, she endured a form of interrogation so extreme that it left her permanently unable to stand or walk. John Bale, a contemporary Protestant writer, recorded that she was so racked that she could neither go nor stand. Unable to walk, she was carried to her execution in a chair on July 16, 1546. At Smithfield, tied to the stake, she remained silent as the flames rose. A bag of gunpowder was fastened to her body to hasten the end. Anne Askew died not for political rebellion, but for reading scripture and refusing to deny her beliefs. She left behind a written account of her interrogations, the examinations, making her one of the earliest known female authors in English. Catherine Howard's Dark Descent, the teenage bride beheaded for betrayal. She was barely more than a child when she became queen, young, charming, and tragically unprepared for the deadly world of Tudor politics. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, entered the Tower of London not as royalty, but as a condemned traitor. Her crime: adultery. Her punishment: death by beheading. Katherine was a cousin of Anne Boleyn and a member of the powerful Howard family. Raised in the household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, she received little formal education or moral guidance. By 1540, at around 17 years old, she caught the attention of the aging King Henry VIII, then in his late 40s, obese, and suffering from chronic health problems. Within months of his failed marriage to Anne of Cleves, Henry wed the vibrant Katherine. He called her his rose without a thorn, but behind the courtly praise, danger loomed. Katherine's past included flirtations, perhaps more before her marriage, and whispers of infidelity quickly circulated. When allegations arose that she had resumed relations with Thomas Culpeper, a favored courtier, Henry's affection turned to fury. In November 1541, Katherine was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower. She was never granted a formal trial. Under interrogation, she confessed to past indiscretions, but denied adultery during her queenship. Still, her fate was sealed. On February 13, 1542, she was taken to Tower Green. According to chronicler Charles Wriothesley, Katherine conducted herself with sorrow and composure. She is said to have practiced laying her head on the block the night before, preparing for the moment when the axe would fall. No final words were officially recorded, but later accounts suggest she may have said, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." Though the quote is likely apocryphal, the sentiment reflects the enduring image of a girl trapped in a deadly game far beyond her understanding. Katherine's body was buried near her cousin Anne Boleyn in the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula. In the shadows of the Tower of London, justice was never merely about guilt. It was about power, fear, and control. The executions of Jane Grey, Margaret Pole, Anne Askew, and Catherine Howard reveal a monarchy willing to sacrifice youth, innocence, and faith for the illusion of order. Each woman's death echoed beyond her final breath, shaping the course of English history and exposing the brutal cost of authority unbound. How did these executions redefine the balance between crown and conscience? And what do they reveal about how power treats the powerless? Comment below. As Anne Askew wrote before she burned, "I would rather read 5 lines of the Bible than hear 5 masses in the church."